Mr. Moore, Utah.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for being here today, witnesses. Our capacity for innovation is among one of our nation's greatest assets, right? We've seen this play out time and time again as we've led the world in so many different circumstances. And, I'm primarily speaking of the healthcare sector, obviously, especially today. Disruptors, entrepreneurs, innovators continually enhance patient care and outcomes with new discoveries and developments. Utah, the state where I represent, is home to some of the most creative innovators in the industry, and I really do appreciate the chairman for assembling this group to ensure that America remains at the forefront of medical innovation. A couple questions for Dr. Macauer. In your testimony, you mentioned that investors may be hesitant to support innovative medical devices because they may become trapped in the valley of death that my colleague from New York discussed. That period where without Medicare coverage following an FDA approval. It's hard for folks to really wrap their heads around that, given that they're both government entities and the lapse that exists there, right? So how has this situation affected patients who could benefit from potentially life-saving or life-altering novel medicines? Just give us your thoughts on that.
It's incredibly impactful. Many of these therapies have undergone rigorous clinical trials, substantial evidence, ultimately resulting in rendering by the FDA that their technologies are safe and effective. Diseases like heart failure, like cancer, diabetes, and in the sense that, let's just take one example, continuous glucose monitoring. We all know how tight control of glucose can ultimately prevent very expensive and very devastating side effects. The loss of limbs, heart attacks, stroke. Those types of delays are very significant for patients as they wait for technologies like that to be available. Thank you.
It is. It's hard for folks. I mean, they think of these organizations as one and the same, and they derive from the same area. We have got to be more in sync with being able to deliver this care to these patients. We've also witnessed the consequences of MSIT's withdrawal in Utah. Again, I bring up Utah. There's a local company with an FDA breakthrough device designation for Parkinson's patients, and it lost a significant amount of funding following the repeal of MSIT. This company has struggled to replace the lost funds, and as a result, Parkinson patients may never have access to a product that could improve their motor function. My colleagues and I firmly believe that a pathway to MSIT is essential for Medicare coverage of innovative technologies. So I co-led a bipartisan bill with Dr. Wenstrup and Congresswomen Del Bene and Sewell to reinstate an MSIT-like pathway. Can you share why a modification of the current coverage pathway is insufficient and why a pathway similar to MSIT is needed?
Absolutely. I think there's a misunderstanding that when a technology is deemed a breakthrough, it really means that that product has the potential to have a major impact on a debilitating or life-threatening disease. After that designation, then there is a substantial amount of evidence that's necessary to clear FDA. Very few companies actually make it, or technologies actually make it to the FDA approval. Once they have finally crossed that gauntlet to have proven themselves safe and effective with the FDA, especially for breakthrough technologies, that's where the opportunity is to give patients access to it. And I think, as evidenced by our survey, innovators are very, very open to continuing to generate evidence development while it is available to patients. And I think that the proposal that's been put forward, which I think is a very supportable one, would allow that and give patients access, early access to these therapies as soon as they're available by FDA, while continuing to collect any necessary evidence that CMS may require.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Lastly, Dr. Lakdawala, the Biden administration has chosen to weaken intellectual property protections for vaccines and is contemplating a similar action for diagnostics and treatments in addition to that. How might this decision adversely affect our long-standing atmosphere of innovation and the future accessibility for the cure of patients?
Thank you, Congressman Moore. In general, weaker IP protection, we know, lowers incentives to innovate simply because it also weakens the rewards for innovation. There is a narrow path for the usefulness of intellectual property waivers, but the problem is there's risk on several sides. We know that if waivers are granted solely for very low-income countries, it doesn't have much impact on innovation, and it can have significant impacts on people's health. The problem is that if you waive IP rights in one country, there's the possibility and the expectation that it may happen for other countries that are not low-income countries. And it's that expectation that then can dampen innovation even absent the actual waiver. So it's opening Pandora's box. It's a possible strategy if there are very tight guardrails that we can do this successfully, but I worry that there are considerable risks when we go down this path.
Thank you for your perspective. You're back.